Well, thank you everyone for being here today. I'm Erin Hardick. I work for a publication called Latitude Media. We cover the energy transition. I specifically work on power and electric utility written and audio stories. And I'm excited to be here to chat with Pablo and Bashir. Pablo, we're in Texas, so I'm assuming most of you, if not all of you, know who Pablo is. He's the president and CEO of ERCOT, and sitting next to him is Bashir. Bashir is the CEO of ERCOT. At ERCOT, he works on big, large digital transformation projects at electric and gas utilities across the country, and that work covers everything from customer systems to workforce and operations, and Bashir can talk a little bit more about that in a second. And Pablo, I think a lot of these people know what ERCOT is, so I won't spend too much time talking about that, but you have quite the career in the electric utility space. Before joining ERCOT, you served as the vice president at NiSource and at NiSource Utilities and various other roles. So thank you both for showing up. We have quite the discussion ahead of us. I think one thing that's overarching is this theme of load growth. It's kind of hard to ignore at this point. We've heard a few speakers talk about it. Peter was just on stage. His service territory is projected to have some incredible load growth numbers. So is ERCOT. Last month, you guys released new forecasts, and I think you can kind of go back and forth about what the actual numbers will be. But by 2030, demand could increase by 2 times what it is today and be up above 100 gigawatts, which is just a lot of power. It's a lot of power. You also mentioned in February that by 2027, power demand could outstrip supply. So that's something that's definitely worth discussing a little bit. So we're just going to spend the next 30 minutes talking about some of these big issues around resiliency, affordability, flexibility of the grid. And then we'll leave a few minutes at the end for audience Q&A. So if you guys could just leave your questions for the last 5 to 7-ish minutes, that would be so awesome. I'll just pass it over to Bashir to talk a little bit more about your work so the audience has a little bit of more of an idea of what ERCOT does before we really dig into it.
Is this on? Yeah, I think it is. Thank you for that. Well, very plain and simple. At ERCOT, we like to solve complex problems. We use a combination of science, empathy, technology, and process engineering to automate as much as we can from a decision management perspective, all tying into a much better employee experience and customer experience. You know, one thing that we say is, you can't really have a great customer experience without an even better employee experience. And I think a lot of people forget about that when they're thinking about building systems and solving large, complex problems. So it's actually an honor to be here and to take stage with Pablo again. It's always fun.
Thanks, Bashir. Okay, Pablo, it seems like maybe summer came early in Texas. Last week was very, very, very hot. Talk about how the grid demanded, or how the grid performed under this demand, and kind of what it tells you about the nature of demand growth today and the current environment that the grid is operating under.
Thank you, Erin. Appreciate it. And thank you for the invitation to be here today. It's a pleasure to join the stage with Bashir. I've had the privilege of working around and with Bashir for many years now. And it's the kind of innovation and progressive thinking in technology that is going to, I think, be the pathway forward for so many of the challenges and issues that I heard prior presenters talk about up here. Yeah, it's gotten hot here in Texas. If you were here 2 weeks ago, it was just lovely. And now it is steamy and warm. We are the beneficiary of being in a very high growth state in Texas. We are one of the fastest growing states almost every year for the last 5 to 10 years. Economic growth continues to top the charts across the US here in Texas. And that's before we got to the whole conversation about what's happening with advanced AI data centers, the continued growth in crypto mining facilities, and just general industrial growth that's happening throughout the state. And so with all of those factors kind of driving this kind of load forecast that we've been talking about, what we're seeing at the same time is real innovation and real investment coming to Texas that's helping us to manage all of those challenges. I think it's important to spend a little bit of time kind of setting the stage since Winter Storm Uri. So Winter Storm Uri occurred back in February of 2021 when an incredibly extreme cold winter event came through the US and through Texas. And we saw some of the coldest temperatures in Texas history during that 4 or 5 day period. And it led to rolling outages on the ERCOT grid, unfortunately to loss of life of hundreds of people across the state of Texas, an incredibly difficult period of time for Texans. And it really shook the faith in the reliability of the electric system here in Texas as well. And for the last 3 years, since that event, we have been working very hard to define pathways forward to improve that reliability and the confidence in what we know is one of the most innovative and reliable electric grids in the US. First, coming right out of that event, it was about, what are the immediate things that we can do in order to provide improved reliability. And so you saw the Texas legislature respond immediately and mandate weatherization of power plants and of gas facilities across the state, because that was one of the largest drivers of the loss of supply, was the freezing of these facilities. That weatherization went into effect within 1 year of that event. So immediately, as soon as that event happened, the legislature happened to be in session in 2021, passed a law, and by that winter, we were already inspecting facilities across the state for their performance capabilities. Since that event, we have had multiple extreme cold weather events that in other parts of the US have seen loss of supply because of extreme weather demands, but that hasn't happened again in Texas. And the impact of that weatherization is something that's really, really critical here. And the other thing that I point to is that our ability to make changes in our market very quickly to be responsive to what's happening in the Texas grid is one of the strengths of the ERCOT independent grid that we operate. ERCOT is different than the other grids around the US that were highlighted in some of the prior presentations in that we're effectively an electric island here in Texas. So that means that we are separated from the eastern part of the US grid and the western part of the US grid. And we have to manage all of the risks and issues within kind of our four walls. What that means, though, is that we're also not subject to FERC oversight. We're not subject to Federal Energy Regulatory Commission oversight. So we can change the rules around how our power markets work and how our transmission siting rules work without having to get approval from FERC authority. That gives us agility and speed to drive change. And that's what's been happening over the last few years, as you've seen things like the weatherization program. You've seen new ancillary services developed, like a firm fuel supply, a new rapid response service called ECRS. These are tools that were added to our portfolio that we could use to operate the grid more reliably. And then on top of that, there was the natural economic strength of this market that led to an explosive growth continuing in solar and batteries over the last 4 or 5 years. We have seen over the course of the last 10 years more installation of wind and solar here in Texas than anywhere else in the United States. And we also, probably at the end of this year or by the end of next year, will have the highest implementation and installation of batteries, utility scale batteries. And it's the combination of those coupled with a very consistent performing thermal fleet that is leading to the improved performance we're seeing on the ERCOT grid. And NERC, which is the National Energy Regulatory Commission that oversees the reliability of the grids for the United States broadly on behalf of FERC, they just published their summer risk assessment, their summer reliability assessment. And they highlight and point out that here in the ERCOT region, from last year to this year, the probability of getting into an emergency condition during August, which is typically the peak season here, went from about 15% probability down to 3% probability this year. And again, that's because of the rapid growth in solar, in batteries, and the strong, consistent performance of our thermal dispatchable fleet that we're seeing that kind of improvement in performance. So even though it's getting very hot here right now, last week, we didn't have any issues. We have plenty of supply and capacity available. I expect we'll be able to weather most of the challenges that we'll expect to see here. And we'll continue to work every day to try to improve reliability and resiliency.
Thanks, Pablo. Bashir, can you talk a little bit about how you see technology playing a more prominent role in grid flexibility and responsiveness? Pablo just talked a lot about batteries, which many people tout as a very flexible resource and meeting the grid's needs in those kind of times when maybe more stable supply is not available. So talk about how you're working on technology solutions to kind of meet the grid needs in those emergency situations.
Yeah, I think all this growth on the surface looks like a net benefit, right? But then there's all this underlining risk under it. The first question I think all of you would ask is, are our teams ready for this growth? Right? And then where can technology come in and aid, right? So a lot of us actually, as business owners, as leaders, sometimes really don't have an understanding of the weaknesses of our team, right? And this is where you can use different types of simulation systems to actually put your teams in hardship and see how they operate. Like, for example, we're all expecting our teams to be able to support us during hurricanes, during cyber events, during storms, during freezes, but have they ever actually practiced those scenarios? Have you actually seen the response and how they're going to respond, whether it's in the call center, whether it's your IT department, whether it's your field technicians, or even your own leaders and how they're making decisions in these types of scenarios and situations? So this is where I really see, technology coming in, using augmented and virtual reality and creating these types of situational training programs using IT and measuring actually the response time and the reactions of our teams becomes really critical, right? I think that's a really big play for technology. Another key thing here is, honestly, automation isn't always the best solution, especially when it comes to high touch point, critical times like during hurricanes, right? You could have, for example, algorithms misinterpreting certain types of demand triggers and turning off parts of your grid. Well, you're going to get into a much bigger problem if that happens, and that all could become natural to your systems over time if you don't have proper human touch points and reviewing of your automated decisioning over time, right? A lot of people put in automated systems and leave them alone and assume that, okay, during our testing cycles, we must have gone through all the permutations to figure out, and we must have figured this out during UAT. Well, if you're not really going through real detailed and deep testing and putting these automation systems through critical situations, you're really not going to understand even how your AI agents or AI decision systems or whatever you're putting in actually are going to respond during this time. And that's where then, your planning for resilience turns into now, unfortunately, an inability to become reliable in front of your consumers and your own employees. So technology is a solution, but it's not the only solution, right? A big part of it is the people side of the house. And if they're not ready to actually respond, then your grid will never be resilient and you'll never be reliable.
Yeah, if I can just add to that, I think that's a great point. And having, the concept of trusted AI is something that is becoming a growing part of the conversation where, you can get answers from any type of an AI model. The question is, how good are those answers, and how high quality are the inputs to that? How high quality are the potential outputs to that? And that's a really important issue, especially like in our business. We're also starting to look at ways where we can leverage the strength and the utility and versatility of AI tools to help improve the complexities of operating a grid with as much variability that we see today. There's two areas where we've already started some development and piloting. One of them is in trying to predict the state of charge of batteries in the future. That turns out to be a fairly challenging thing to anticipate and to model, because batteries have a very different operating model than other type of resources on the grid do. They're not traditional generators of power. They are basically a time displacement use of power. They hold power to a point in time where it's valuable to release it, and then they release it and they choose to charge and bring power in at times where it's advantageous to do so. And during the course of a day, a battery operator is thinking about, what's the optimal time for me to leverage the storage that I have? Is it right now at the peak heat of the afternoon, or is there going to be a greater need when the sun starts to set, and will I anticipate the economic value or potential at that point in time to be better than it is today? So it's almost like an option modeling system that is being done every minute of the day by these batteries, determining what to do at that point in time. And as a grid operator, we have to anticipate, based on that kind of thinking and that kind of analytics, how to model what these assets are going to do in a future period in time. So we're leveraging AI to help understand and to predict that kind of performance. And we're also looking at AI for things like load forecasting. Load forecasting used to be a very simple thing to do. You could effectively take a look at the weather. You could take a look at, what your industrial environment was in terms of your industrial customer classes, and you knew what your residential population was, and you could put all of those factors together, and you had a load forecast. Well, now our load forecast is highly variable based on weather changes. It's highly variable based on different types of customers that can be price sensitive. Everything from steel mills to crypto miners can be very price sensitive. And so as wholesale prices move up and down based on availability and scarcity on the grid, we'll see different profiles of that load show up. And so we're using AI to help anticipate what that could mean in a future period of time, and seeing if we can assist our grid operators with getting another set of inputs and another set of eyes effectively on what's actually happening on the grid. And I think there's incredible potential use cases. That's just scratching the surface on two little use cases in our world. And I think there's going to be literally dozens and dozens of different kinds that we're going to have to continue to evaluate. But that trusted AI concept is one that's going to be core to it being a usable tool for us.
You're both talking about AI, which is an emerging technology. It's not something we've seen used a lot in power systems or for grid operators and utilities. How do you think about innovation in an industry that has a very rigid regulatory structure? Like, how do you balance those two things?
That's a great question. The key word that Pablo mentioned was trust, right? And just like even between people, it takes us time to trust each other, right? So it's going to take a long time for, I would say, legislative bodies and regulators to have the comfort level to allow AI to actually achieve its maximum potential, right? And it's going to take a lot of, I'd say, first movers to have the guts as well as the pockets, because it's not a cheap journey as well too, right? It's going to cost a lot of money, and it's going to take a bunch of different industry experts to come together to create a model that I think politicians, regulators, citizens, and the utilities all together will trust, right? So I don't think we're far away from it, right? Because one of the candidates or the panelists earlier said technology isn't the issue anymore, right? And technology is there. AI is available. It's more available now than it's ever been in the world. I think probably most folks here have a ChatGPT or Claude or some form of LLM app on your phone today, right? So we all have it in our hands and in our pockets. And it creates this sometimes unrealistic expectations that I should just be able to plug all my systems into here and to see rapid change, but not really taking into consideration the course of action that it would take to get to a point where you have trust, like what Pablo mentioned, right? So from my personal perspective, I think we're probably around 5 to 7 years away from getting to a point where there's that trust standard that's truly being defined in the energy space for folks to use that. And I really hope whoever does it open sources it and doesn't make money off of it, because everybody should use it. I think this should be for the people at the end of the day, because it's going to help utilities, water companies, gas providers, and anybody who's in this business provide a much better service to the people who are depending on us on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, and my perspective I agree 100% with that. And I think in ERCOT, we're going to probably see the potential for some of that growth and development perhaps happen a little more quickly in our energy space because of the natural economic incentive that underlies the way our market works. And so here we have a highly deregulated market construct where retailers are able to offer what they believe to be the best solution and best products and services for their customers, and they compete against each other to meet the needs of those customers. Power generators are in the same position. They have the opportunity to compete with their peers to try to have the best technology, supply service to provide. And so we're largely an unregulated market space when it comes to the touch points that affect customer interactions and the operations of the grid. And so that's, I think, an opportunity for us to try things out here, to fail in some cases, where, it doesn't necessarily add the value or it doesn't have the potential performance characteristics that we think, and then to reinvent and to reapply. And I think we'll see that cycle of innovation happen here in ERCOT because of that very competitive platform that we operate here on the grid, which I think is an important part of that story.
Absolutely. And Aaron, I would even say there are some things that are even lower hanging fruits that are success for utilities to push out there to gain trust of the customers and the citizens that they serve, right? That maybe isn't fully AI driven, but it's tied to technology. If you look at outage maps, something that should be looked at as something very simple, right? We service a utility out in Tampa, Florida, Tampa Electric, so they got hit really hard with Hurricane Ian and Milton, right? And actually, we're proud that they're using our outage map to be able to provide updates to their customers to report their outages. We even, turn something into an outage storm mode, so when an outage is coming on, they get ready, it starts pushing out workflows to push out, procedures, policies, banners. So we've tried to automate as much as we can. But the thing that you can't get rid of with technology is customers coming onto that site constantly to see where's a safe zone, when's the power going to be back, how can I get home, right? And that's an important thing. Over a 4.5-day period, we had over you can reach out to the utility and ask them, 500 million sessions. They've never experienced anything even close to that. And actually, our outage map was one of the only ones in the state of Florida that was still up because the rest of the sites weren't prepared for something like this. So when you look at resilient infrastructure, it's more than just the physical infrastructure that we see every day, right? There's also back-end infrastructure that creates the sense of reliability to the customer. And if you can't get that right, then a lot of customers are going to say, well, I don't care what type of AI programs you're going to do. When my power's out, you can barely tell me when it's going to be restored. So there's this big perception that you have to balance out as you push out these new innovations, as you push out these things to ensure that at least what your basic offering is, you're doing it excellent, not well, but excellent, before you start marketing that you're going to go even the step further than that. And I think a lot of utilities still need to optimize their basic offering while they're also trying to innovate at the same time. And that's a really hard thing to do because customers keep expecting more and more and more and more and more. And that's why, I've worked with a lot of CIOs and I took inspiration actually from Netflix. I'm sure most of us here have Netflix account. Netflix actually took on this concept called the chaos monkey. If you don't know it, I'd recommend you ask your CIOs and CTOs to go look this up. And that's the way to actually answer the question, how resilient are we? And what is the concept of the chaos monkey? The chaos monkey basically, imagine you take a monkey, stick him in your data center, and give him a wrench, and you have him just start smashing systems. And you have no idea what system's going to go down and when. And then watch how your team reacts to it. That's a way for you to actually see how resilient your organization is by not even telling them that you're doing this and seeing them react when systems go down. What happens when my SCADA system goes down? What happens when my outage management system goes down? What happens when my call center system goes down? How ready are we to react to these things? And this is the foundation that I feel the utilities have to master first as they keep trying to move forward throughout their journey to meet the demand that all of us are putting on utilities.
I want to talk a little bit about behind-the-meter assets a bit more before we go to audience Q&A, but we are about to go to audience Q&A here in a minute. Pablo, you talked a lot about the ERCOT market structure, how it's facilitated growth in many different areas, especially in generation, clean generation. The battery boom in Texas is very real. But what about customer-sided resources? How close are we to seeing those being real assets in the market? I'm talking, EVs, home batteries, rooftop solar, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, it's actually a reality today in Texas. So we launched 2 years ago essentially a virtual power plant type of pilot. We call it the Aggregated Distributed Energy Resource Pilot, ADER. And it is intended to qualify aggregation of these types of resources that are behind the meter at a residential or commercial level, things like rooftop solar, electric vehicles, smart thermostats, battery walls that are installed in homes, and being able to aggregate them to be able to provide services to the grid. The innovative concept was not being able to prove that those could combine and deliver energy. What was really innovative was actually leveraging them for ancillary services on the grid. And we were able to prove that it was able to do so with the kind of telemetry and performance characteristics of a group of aggregated resources. And so we have that today. It's small. It's, it's under 80 megawatts in size. And it's largely in the areas down around Houston and Dallas where you've seen the clusters of some of these aggregated resources. But what this platform is going to enable is essentially a broader market service that we're going to be able to open up once this pilot finishes and we transition it to essentially just a set of protocols for how a set of aggregated resources needs to perform in order to be a grid participant. And we'll be able to then leverage them in the dispatch process for regular energy supply, and also they'll be able to sell in day-ahead energy services through the ancillary services market, which is another level of performance as well as economic opportunities that this offers. And I'm really excited about that. I think further and deeper integration into behind the meter and into residential consumer participation in energy services is a significant step forward for grid operators across the globe. We're well positioned here to do that because we've got that competitive economic platform that we can use to incentivize doing that. And I think we've also got the kind of innovation and technology companies that are coming to Texas to partner with customers to provide these kinds of solutions. And I think we'll see that kind of progress continue to grow here.
Okay, great. We have time for maybe one or two questions. There's a microphone up front if you'd like to ask Pablo and Bashir a question.
Thank you for this terrific panel. And Pablo, thank you for the great job you've done for Texas. It's really amazing all the pieces that you hold together. You've talked a little bit about how generation has grown in the last few years. Would you talk about the percentages of that? And then in light of 3 bills that are pending in the Texas legislature right now, Senate bills 388, 715, and 819, and the impact they would have on the growth of generation in our great state. Thank you.
Yeah, so the question refers to, one, if you look at the growth characteristics of the ERCOT grid over the last 5 years, it's very largely been through the development of solar, batteries, and wind are the 3 largest, fastest growing resources on the grid. And there's legislation now that's being considered that is its intention, the intention I believe is sound in that it's trying to find ways to balance the growth going forward. And so as we've talked about and other presenters have talked about, needing to support this growth with the kind of energy supply that can meet the demands of that growth is what utilities and grid operators around the country are trying to contend with and what they're trying to accomplish. And so only developing one type of resource alone typically is not the diverse portfolio that you want in order to support that kind of growth. Here in Texas, we have seen growth almost exclusively with solar and batteries. So legislation is being contemplated that would effectively require a certain amount of firming to be done to those renewable resources and ensure that their output is guaranteed with either backup thermal supply or with backup batteries. And while the intention is to provide more of a balance going forward, the concern that's out there is that that could slow down the growth of new renewable resources here in the coming years. And if it were applied to existing assets that are installed already, it could potentially make those existing assets less economic, and depending on market conditions, it could be at risk of closure. And so those are concerns, obviously, when you're looking at a high growth environment, which is where we are today. We're looking forward at rapid growth over the next several years. We really need and want every energy source to be coming onto the grid. We definitely would like to see more thermal, long duration supply coming on the grid, but we also want to see all of the type of supply that's been coming over these last few years continue to grow and invest in Texas. Thank you for your question.
Okay, that was such a great question. It's actually the only one we're going to take. We're out of time. It's time to bring Jason back up here, but please give Pablo and Bashir a round of applause.